Welcome back to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics and podcasts such as this one, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording today's episode on Wednesday, July 19th. And joining me, as always, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist, friend of all. And Dr. O, one of the things that I appreciate about you and the way that you work is that you are a prolific content creator, that you are analyzing stories that are out there in the marketplace. You're creating original work from your own research. You are really seriously, you're a machine when it comes to publishing. You wrote a piece for Crain's Chicago Business recently about the arc of the Chicago housing market. And of course, as you know, I live in the greater Chicago area, so I was keenly interested in that. I'll tell you what, I don't want to predispose this because, it's like you wrote this story. I thought your approach on this was unique and interesting. Why don't you tell people what you wrote about and what your findings are?
Yeah, of course. Look, Chicago's population has been on the decline for a while. Although, some people might claim that, that maybe population growth just slowed, but it's not been declining. But the bottom line is outmigration. You look at census numbers, outmigration for the Chicago metro, unbelievable, more than anywhere else around the country, I think. And people leaving the state of Illinois altogether, right? And so we saw a lot of these headlines. Then all of a sudden, we got a housing market that, where basically there's a shortage of housing units across the country. Buyers came back into the housing market, but there's just no supply. You had a pandemic surge in house prices and rents. And Chicago happens to be one of the most affordable places to live among the big cities. Look, the typical mortgage payment for a new home buyer in Los Angeles, putting 10% down on their home, is roughly 80% of their income. They would have to pay 80% of their income. That's going to disqualify a lot of people, right? So you look at LA, New York, super expensive, unaffordable. And then you have, by the way, New York's kind of the exception. New York's housing market is still buzzing right now. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So much money going in there. Are City is still doing well. In fact, right now it's recovering like crazy.
But not New York. You're not talking about the state of New York. You're
exactly.
talking specifically.
There are a couple places in New York that are more affordable, like Buffalo, New York, right? So sure. So basically, the most affordable places are doing really, really well right now. Right. The Midwest in general is doing amazingly well right now. Right. So because it's more affordable, relatively more affordable. And Chicago, the third largest city in America. Well, guess what? The Chicago metro is doing really well. Top 5 in terms of rent growth. And while house prices were falling, it fell in 27 of 50 top metros in the past year. Home values are still growing in Chicago.
We're talking about greater Chicago. I think, the growth that we've seen, in my neighborhood and in the many suburbs around the city that were, that have all of a sudden started to kind of break up and above, numbers that, that we have not seen here for more than 15 years. 2 factors. One of them is that we are just way, way, way behind on recovery from the 2008 crash. That's one. When the country dipped, the Chicago market went down, we are in some cases 35%. And the other part of it is that, it's we're a long way away from the city. You get outside of the city of Chicago, and it's not the easiest city to get around in. If you need to have access to the airport, if you need to have access to downtown, and you live out where I am, it's not easy. And so, you've got to be living a pretty specific suburban focused life. Like your work has to be kind of out this way. Your life has to be kind of out this way because you're somewhat isolated in this market. I do think that we're seeing some residual benefit from that from people who simply want to get away from what's going on in the city of Chicago and a ripple effect back out to the suburbs, like the original growth of the suburbs, that the problems of the city of Chicago are such that people don't want to raise a family there. They would like to go and do something different. So there is turnover. And I think there are people that are sort of making their way out to the suburbs, not in the waves, like in the 80s or the 90s.
But here's the bigger point. And you're right. You're totally right, by the way.
It's one in a row for me, my friend.
That you're totally right that basically the Chicago market in general, Chicagoland, basically is still kind of basically recovered from the global financial crisis, right? Home prices were just coming back up after years of being subdued. But that is exactly the point, that because it's relatively more affordable, you have people that are interested in Chicago again, especially, given the fact that for the longest time, it was just on the decline. And I'll give you another greater point. Fewer and fewer home sellers, right? So we saw that in the past year, the number of new listings, people putting their homes for sale on the market, is down 30%. And by the way, that's true across the country, right? New listings down, fewer people selling. But it's more true in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area. And so you have basically fewer sellers. And fewer sellers basically mean fewer U-Haul trucks. You got fewer people moving. And so some people might argue, well, if you have fewer people selling, you probably also have fewer people buying, which is a valid point. But Chicago historically has been a magnet for top talent, students, because of great universities, and international worker migrants. It's got a financial sector. It's got a rising tech industry. It's got all these things going for it. It's in a great geographical location. And so you take all these factors and perhaps, and again, I'm not saying that this is going to cause a reversal of the well-documented Chicago exodus, but perhaps it could slow the housing market conditions today, could slow the pace of that exodus, because you have these students, you have these international migrants who are basically renters usually at first, right? Taking advantage of the fact that rent as a share of income in Chicago is about 28%, right? 28% of income spent on rent compared to 32% for the typical renter in the US. And that basically rent as a share of income in Chicago has just come back to where it was in 2016, whereas it's increased by 4 percentage points for renters across the country. So you have a more affordable rental market in Chicago. You have, more people coming in, renters coming in from other places, likely happening. It's happened for a long time, but it's probably happening even more now. And then you have fewer sellers and fewer people leaving the area, right? So you put all that together and you have basically a situation where the decline could actually slow, right? And I guess that's good news for the Chicago area.
It's a fascinating mental exercise, and I appreciate you breaking it down for the folks. As always, it's just great to spend time with you. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.